Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever it is, wherever you are. I guess I'm your U.S. history teacher. I'm Zach Godfrey. Today's topic, Industrial Revolution. And we're going to focus specifically on the Industrial Revolution and kind of how does the Industrial Revolution parallel and connect the manifest destiny of America that we've been talking about for a while, from essentially like the early 1800s, War of 1812, all the way through now the Compromise of 1850, which we just covered. We have more focused on the politics of America's growth and America's expansion. We haven't focused on the change in industry, the change of technology that happens essentially the same time, that when we tell all the stories, when we put all the stories together, it makes so much more sense. So again, Industrial Revolution with a focus on the change of America in the 1800s, 1800 to 1850. You know how we do this. I'm going to break the topics down. You're going to take your notes while you're watching the lecture. Topics on the left. Explain, describe, summarize, add supplemental notes to each topic on the right. When you're done, summarize it, and there will be some questions online for you to answer to show that you have mastered your understanding of the topic of the Industrial Revolution. Here we go. Topic 1. We're going to go over a gentleman and an inventor named Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney is going to kind of just change Industrial Revolution, industrialization, manufacturing for everybody. But really in America, and he's going to do it. He's going to impact both regions, the North and the South. We're going to focus first, however, on the South. So this is Eli Whitney. Topic 1, Eli Whitney and his impact on the South. Well, how does Eli Whitney impact the South? Eli Whitney is going to invent something called the cotton gin. We've talked about culture of the regions all the way back to colonial regions and now into American regions. We know that the South's culture is dependent on plantation and cash cropping. We know one of the main cash crops of the South is cotton. But what we haven't talked about is how do we turn cotton into textiles? Well, you have to take the cotton plant, the fluffy white stuff from the plant itself, and there's a lot of pricklies and thorns and stuff. It's a painful process. It takes time to remove that and get the seeds and all the painful stuff out. So that's a process that has to be done by hand. Until Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793. And I'm not an expert on the cotton gin, but essentially you can put the cotton plant in there and turn the thing, and it separates all the painful stuff and the seeds and whatnot away from the cotton. And it dramatically increases the rate you can remove the cotton fabric from the cotton plant. And so what's that going to do? It's going to increase the amount of cotton that's produced. Well, how do we do that? We talked about the use of Eli Whitney's cotton gin. It's going to really increase the ability to get the cotton. Well, we know about forced labor. And so unfortunately for people that were enslaved in America, mainly in the South, or even those that were free Africans that were eventually brought to America for forced labor to be enslaved, that it's going to increase the demand of slavery. So it increased cotton production, but unfortunately increased demand of slavery. I have some numbers I'm going to read for you very quickly. In regards to increased cotton production because of the cotton gin, from 1790, we went through bales. I don't know how much cotton is in a bale, use your imagination. But in 1790, the American South was producing about 3,000 bales of cotton. By the time we got to 1820, America could produce about 300,000 bales a year. So that is a dramatic increase in cotton production as a result of the cotton gin. Obviously, it's going to make cash crops and plantations much more profitable in the South. It's going to dramatically increase the demand and need for forced labor in the South as well. You will see the amount of slaves in America's South is about 700,000 in 1790. That will almost double in 20 years to 1810 to 1.2 million. So you see tremendous increase in cotton production, tremendous increase, unfortunately, in the amount of enslaved people in America. So what's that going to do for America's culture, and how is this connected to manifest destiny and then eventually sectionalism that will lead to the Civil War? Well, this is going to be the economic mainstay of the South, the economic staple. And because of it, people will be dependent on this system of forced labor, unfortunately, and you will have increased attitudes, increased political and social efforts to maintain the system of slavery because of its profitability. So as attitudes in the North become more open and enlightened to the horrors of slavery, you'll simultaneously have people that become more and more defensive of its practices because of how profitable it has gotten. And one of the things that has made it so much more profitable was Eli Whitney's cotton gin. And so that's Eli Whitney's cotton gin and his impact on the South. One other thing too, so obviously the cotton gin, it's going to make it more desirable to be somebody involved in cash crop process, to be a plantation owner. That's going to motivate people that do have slaves to continue to expand west into regions like Texas. We know one of the issues in Texas was that the Americans migrating into Texas were bringing slaves. So why were they bringing slaves? Because they wanted to have cash crops and plantations and make profits that may not have been as foreseeable to achieve without Eli Whitney's cotton gin. And so it just connects the entire story of expansion, the question of expansion of slavery, and the eventual divisions in culture by region of the North and the South. So that's Eli Whitney cotton gin impact on the South, topic 1. We're going to stick with Eli Whitney. We're moving on to topic 2 though, and it's Eli Whitney's impact on the North. So Eli Whitney, because of the cotton gin, is going to get a lot of notoriety and a lot of fame as an inventor. And is going to use that success to make a deal with the federal government in the late 1700s. We're not going to go into too much detail, but one of the issues in the late 1700s that kind of divided and separated the ideologies of John Adams and the Federalists and Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans was this possible war with France. So we were preparing for a possible conflict with France. And so they made a deal, the federal government, with Eli Whitney, this famous inventor, to produce these new guns, or this new quick way we can make new guns. And he had a demonstration, Eli Whitney, to show what he called interchangeable parts. And so all of these different parts that can make up all of these different types of muskets were spread out on a table in front of political leaders, I think including John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And he was like, look, this can go with this and make this can go with this and make this. And he kind of showed them the long-term intentions and purpose and possibilities of this concept of interchangeable parts, this concept that different pieces of machinery can automatically be snapped together, screwed together, things like that to make different things. And we live in a society now where manufacturing and interchangeable parts are so intertwined, it's almost hard for us to unpack it and even think about, well, that wasn't always a thing. And no, it wasn't, where you could just plug something in from one machine into another, and all these different types of machines could communicate and work and connect to make different things. And that was an idea created by Eli Whitney, this master inventor, and it's called interchangeable parts. Well, what does that have to do with the North, Mr. Godfrey? Well, we're going to learn about the beginning of the American Industrial Revolution, where we see what we call like mills and then eventually factories pop up all over in the North throughout the New England region. Well, one of the ways you can make an assembly line is you have different parts and different machines that you can click and poke and prod and pull and connect all these things together. So interchangeable parts essentially equals mass production, and mass production is going to be a part of the economic staple that is the industrial North that we're going to talk about in just a second. So we have Eli Whitney inventing this concept of interchangeable parts. Think about all the different things that you use, cords and different things that work with different types of machines, different types of products. I know when I'm charging a PlayStation controller, for example, I use a USB cable. And sometimes when I'm charging other different products, like my razor, for example, I may use the same cord. So a cord made by a different manufacturer, connecting different parts for different purposes, but bringing everything together and making everything more easy to use, and therefore increasing the rate that production of machines can occur. And that's interchangeable parts. That's Eli Whitney, and that's topic 2. All right, here we go. Topic 3. This is a fascinating story. I love it. And it's Samuel Slater, topic 3, Samuel Slater and the textile mills. Well, who is Samuel Slater? I'll tell you what he's called, and then I'll tell you how he got these nicknames. Samuel Slater will be called, I believe Andrew Jackson gave him this nickname, but the father of the American Industrial Revolution. Many in Great Britain will call Samuel Slater, Slater the Traitor. Well, here's the deal with Samuel Slater. He was born in like 1768 in Great Britain, I think to like a working class family. I believe his father lived in these places like called like a mill town, where you have these mills where you could take essentially like cotton and turn the cotton to thread, and eventually that thread could be connected to make cloth. But the mills themselves would take the cotton, which I am assuming was exported out of America, imported into Great Britain, and turn the cotton into thread. And he worked there, and his father worked there, I believe. Well, his father is gonna die, and he will be indentured into the owner of a mill, and he will essentially like learn how the mill works and learn how it operates. So just kind of think about all those things right now. And so we see in the late 1700s the growth of industrialization of mills in Great Britain, and they're like killing the industry and manufacturing throughout the world because they have these mills and they can produce this thread so quickly. And so there's people in America that want to build these mills in America, but here's the thing, they like made patents and rules and regulations in Great Britain that said like these rules need to stay here in our country to protect British manufacturing. And you cannot take the plans or the concepts to other countries and create mills in other countries because they wanted their nation to dominate manufacturing. Well, Samuel Slater, he's smart. He knows he probably can't build a mill in Great Britain because that's now already dominated by rich people. He memorizes the plans to build a mill, like photographic memory, and takes them to America and essentially helps create some mills. And it starts in Rhode Island in the 1790s, eventually goes into Massachusetts. Again, that's in the New England region. And you see the creation of cotton mills in New England because of Sam Slater essentially memorizing the ideas and taking the ideas, the plans of how to build the mills and building them in America. Well, what does that mean? That leads to less need of outside resources from other countries. We don't always necessarily have to export our cotton to Great Britain for it to be made into thread. That's one thing. We will have increased production of thread in America. And you will see textile mills, that's what they're called, textile mills, pop up throughout the New England region. And this is the beginning of the industrialization in the North. This is the beginning of really separating a strong, distinct line between culture, economic culture in the New England region, as far as now we have industry, and in the South we still have cash cropping, plantations. And so that's it. It's the birth of mills and mill culture in New England. It's the birth of people slowly starting to leave their farmlands and moving into these more, centralized located areas around mills and working in mills and not necessarily living in farms. And that's going on in the New England region. They're not really popping up throughout the South. Again, the South is cash crop dependent. All right, Samuel Slater, textile mills, father of American industry, because he brings the plans over and starts creating textile mills in America from Great Britain. Again, the British call him Slater the Traitor, but we look at him as Americans as an American hero. Okay, topic 4, this will be our last topic of the day. It's the Lowell System, another fascinating story. So you have a businessman, an American businessman from the Massachusetts, New England region. His name is Francis Cabot Lowell. He sees textile mills pop up throughout the region. He also has already seen the Industrial Revolution kind of take place in Great Britain and seeing how that's already worked and led to success. And he starts to see some mills in Great Britain where not only do they take the cotton and turn it into thread, but they then take the thread and turn the thread into just the final product, the final fabric. And he's like, well, that's a great idea. It's all like in one location instead of like multiple locations to make this one thing. In addition, what he's seeing in these factories in Great Britain is like they're making little communities based on the factories, like, and they're bringing people in and they're like living either like on the factory or right off the factory, like little factory towns. And so everything is like all in one, all inclusive, connected to this mill. And so Francis Lowell said, let's do that in America. And so he started building what they call like mills based on the Lowell system, where you do everything in one place. You have the cotton, you turn the cotton into thread, you turn the thread into fabric, and let's build a little community for our workers to live so they don't have to like, travel from farms and stuff. They literally they live in there, and it's like the birth of cities essentially, because everybody starts living around their job and they're not living like out in the countryside. And so it's the birth of cities. It's also like kind of the beginning of the end of like that truly Jeffersonian independent agrarian attitude, to where like, I don't need anybody, I don't need the government, I don't need anything. I'm just going to go out into the wilderness, give me a few acres, I'm going to grow enough land, I'm going to read books when I want to read books, I'll be truly free that way. Not necessarily, because now we're all like dependent on this factory system kind of created by Slater and then eventually evolved into Lowell. At first, right now, you're probably like, well, Mr. Godfrey, what did Lowell do that was that much different than like Slater? He said, okay, let's turn the thread into the last, like the final product, the fabric. Yeah, okay. That's true. Here's another thing he did that's going to really flip American culture, mainly in New England, upside down. Is so he built these little communities around his mills, but he created, who he brought in? He brought in women, like unmarried young women, to live in these little mill towns and work his mills. Okay, that changes everything. All right, you have the introduction of women into the workforce. Again, it's like the changing of a traditional family structure, like of what was existing in American culture prior to that, introduction of a women into the workplace. Eventually, that's slowly going to trickle into the passion and the advocacy for women equality, for women's suffrage. Eventually, women's suffrage and women fight for advocacy will also connect to the fighting and advocacy for the rights of people that were enslaved. So it's just going to completely change American culture, because it's a transition out of that old system of self-sustaining farming for you and your family to now like cities and women working and more focus on human rights and equality. Also like leisure time, museums, libraries will start to exist around the mill towns and stuff, because now instead of like living on your farm and finding recreation that way when you're not just sustaining your farm, you work your day at the mill. If you have time after, you have time to kill because you don't have property to maintain. You work your job and then you go to your apartment. And so it just changes the way of life, and it changes the way of life especially for New England. So now think about everything I just described to you, from the way the South was structured with the plantations and this dependency on forced labor and cash crops, and how has their culture changed, really, the Southern people's culture changed over hundreds of years. Not that dramatically from the first beginnings of colonization in the Americas, but how has the culture of New England changed? It's changed tremendously even in the last like 50 years. If you go from 1800 to 1850, you have industrialization, you have cities, you have women in workplaces, you have leisure activities, and these are the sectional differences. Not only do you have the difference in argument of what to do with the practice of slavery as we expand. See, now, how do we do this, Mr. Garber? We went all the way back. You're talking expansion again. Yes, I am. All of these things built America up on the east, and now we're going to bring with it to us west. These things allow us to start moving west. But then you have these two distinct groups of people. The South and the world they envision, cash crop plantation, they want to spread that throughout their Southwest, throughout their area, and the North, and their vision of industrialization in cities and possibly equity and rights, and the way they want to spread that. So two distinct cultures rise from this, and two distinct economic systems rise to this, and it's one country. And we're talking about the issue of slavery now, and it's such an important polarizing issue that even though it's one country, these two distinct cultural regional identities, how are they ever going to mesh as they continue to grow and change and become less and less alike? even though it's one country. That's it today, guys. That's the Industrial Revolution. You know what to do. You know what I expect. I miss you all very, very much. I want you to be staying active. I want you to care about the people that care about you. Be respectful, be kind, be loving. I miss you. I love you. Peace.